Hey everyone, this is Moderate Rebels. I'm Ben Norton. This episode is part of a live stream interview that I did with my co-host Max Blumenthal and our colleague at the Gray Zone, Aaron Maté. We discussed the hawkish foreign policy of the Biden administration and how the U.S. has been pushing Ukraine toward war with Russia as part of a NATO proxy war on Moscow, and just how dangerous this is, how it's devastated the country of Ukraine, but also risks potentially World War III and a massive global conflict. This is part of a larger discussion that we had as part of our live stream, and we divided it into multiple parts. There's also a part on the Cold War on China. There's also a part on Syria regime changers smearing the anti-war movement, and more. So definitely check out the future parts. But without further ado, here is our discussion. This is Max and I speaking with Aaron Maté. There's a lot of topics that we want to discuss today. You know, we are now entering the third month of the Biden administration, and we've seen that on foreign policy, there have been very few differences between the Biden administration and Trump. In fact, you could argue that the Biden administration is more hawkish than the Trump administration. And you know, I've seen people joking that the only real difference between Mike Pompeo and Antony Blinken is as a diet. So it's been pretty incredible to see just how hawkish the Biden administration has been. So I'm wondering, we can just start there. And there's a lot of issues we want to talk about today, but what do you guys think about the current situation?
Well, first of all, welcome to our manel. And you know, we're gonna man up with Ajit later on. Ajit Singh, great contributor to the Gray Zone. But yeah, Ben, and if you came here by way of Twitter via our Twitter card, then you saw. I hope you picked me out of our criminal lineup. Ben is actually being tried as an adult, so just wanted to get that out of the way. And yeah, there's so much to talk about that we were actually debating before we got started a little bit late, where to even start. I think we're going to do China when Ajit comes on, because he's really been just shattering a lot of the imperial narratives that are just coming out with increasing volume. But today there was actually a lot of discussion on social media of an issue that had been kind of buried and forgotten. And it was interesting, actually, in the last, I'd say 2 or 3, even or throughout the Trump administration, for the first time, an issue where I got attacked. I think the first time I was ever attacked as like Putin's puppet was on the issue of Ukrainian neo-Nazism. Ukraine is really the base of international neo-Nazism at this point. I mean, you actually have a militia incorporated into the National Guard that is semi-officially neo-Nazi, the Azov Battalion. You have the founder of 2 neo-Nazi parties, Andrei Poruby, who is the speaker of the Ukrainian Rada, the parliament. And you have the interior minister basically as the patron of the National Corps, this neo-Nazi fascistic group connected to the Azov Battalion, which is actually active in Kiev. It's sort of their political wing. Anyway, I mean, when you would talk about it back in 2014 during the Maidan Coup, which was one of the signal events in the history, that I think this is one of the defining events in 21st century European history. If you talked about it, you would be called Putin's puppet. But, you know, and I was actually attacked by some Polish neoliberal in the New York Times for daring to talk about this back in the day. But then throughout the Trump era, there was actually some discussion. You would even see some characters at Bellingcat criticizing these fascistic forces. An Amnesty International report came out in Ukrainian about how destructive they are to Ukraine's social fabric. But we didn't really hear much about what was happening in Ukraine. And we didn't hear any protest when the Biden administration came in, and the author of the Maidan Coup, Victoria Nuland, the wife of Robert Kagan, this extreme neoconservative who had been the president of the arms industry and State Department funded Center for New American Security, this militaristic think tank in Washington, came back into the State Department. And I felt like as soon as I heard the name Nuland, there was going to be heat on the eastern Ukrainian frontier. And today we see a massing of Russian troops in response to shelling by Ukraine of the civilian regions of Donbass. We've seen the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, who has kind of came in as kind of a peace president and has been going nuts for 3 weeks. We've seen him basically call for an invasion of Crimea, which would, bring us to the brink of world war. An invasion of Crimea against the wishes of its Russian-speaking population. And now brinksmanship has reached new levels. And this is part of just the general kind of atmosphere of tension that we've seen with the Biden administration. I mean, before we get into details with Ukraine, let's talk about Biden calling for the denuclearization of North Korea, which means no diplomacy is possible there. That's a red line for the North Koreans. A related issue, Biden administration threatening to sanction Germany and German companies over the Nord Stream pipeline with Russia. Which would deprive Ukraine of billions of dollars, but which is a really important deal for Merkel's government. And there's some rumors and murmuring in Germany that the Biden crew is actually backing the Green Party to undermine Merkel. You've even seen the Biden administration threaten India with sanctions over buying Russian missiles. Then the attack on Syria, which was one of Biden's first foreign policy moves as president, calling Putin a killer, calling Xi an autocrat without a democratic bone in his body, and then going to try to have a climate summit with these figures who he attacked. I mean, it's this escalatory rhetoric, and Aaron, what set the stage for this, and particularly Ukraine, was the domestic hysteria of Russiagate. I really feel like in so many senses here, Biden is catering to a domestic constituency that was cultivated by the corporate media for the past 4 years.
Yeah, you saw that. I think you pointed this out when he did the interview with George Stephanopoulos. It was like George Stephanopoulos, the reporter, who was trying to encourage Biden to call Putin a killer and to announce some new kind of bellicose policy towards Russia. He was like, how are they going to pay for it? How are they going to pay for this? Talking about that bullshit report that came out recently about a supposed influence operation targeting the 2020 election, even though the report could come up with zero examples of it, nor explain how it came to this conclusion that Russia ordered yet another election interference operation. I wonder about what they're actually thinking in Ukraine. Are they trying to start another war there? Or is this the kind of thing where with like Georgia in 2008, where I think Saakashvili, the Georgian president, either he misunderstood Bush and John McCain and people like that, or he was encouraged to basically launch an incursion into
South Ossetia.
South Ossetia. And then so Russia responded and then he got creamed. Like, is that do you think actually that the US will be prepared to send in troops here? I mean, I just don't see it.
I mean, the Ukrainian readout of the call with Blinken or Blinken's people was really disturbing because they actually gave the impression that the U.S. was ready to go to war, but the State Department has been much more. They said that, we have we offer our unequivocal support to Zelensky. And we saw in the past weeks, as Zelensky has been shutting down opposition media, which the U.S. would condemn in any country that it targets for regime change as authoritarian, dictatorial, even totalitarian. I mean, he's just been shutting down Russian language media left and right, especially outlets owned by Viktor Medvedchuk, who is considered a pro-Russian oligarch, but who speaks for a large part of Ukraine's population. The U.S. supported that. They vocally, aggressively supported the shutting down of these opposition stations. And so we see clearly the U.S. is actually pushing Ukraine into this kind of neoliberal NATO-oriented regime, the same way that it's actually protecting Jovenel Moïse in Haiti, allowing him to basically wipe out the Supreme Court, eliminate the parliament, run a one-man rule for the next 2 years, this unpopular figure. So, I mean, we can clearly see the Biden administration as it came into power saying diplomacy is back. Biden was saying America is back and we're going to stand up for democracy and the rules-based international order, actually advancing a unilateral order where it is actually pushing specific governments towards autocracy, Ukraine being a perfect example. And this was totally inevitable. I mean, I brought up Victoria Nuland, but we can also talk about Michael Carpenter, who is this completely unhinged character. Back in 2018, I went up to the U.S. Capitol because this figure I mentioned before, Andrei Parubi, who literally founded 2 neo-Nazi parties, the wonderfully named Social National Party, which is certainly not they're sort of antisocial, and Patriot of Ukraine, which was like their street movement that beat up migrants. He founded them. He's spoken favorably of Hitler as a populist leader. He's close to all the neo-Nazi factions we talked about. He was welcomed into the U.S. Capitol. It was a big display. All the Hill staff came out. It was really shocking to me, along with Georgian lawmakers and all these, figures from the Baltic states where the U.S. is running these like NATO puppet regimes. And Parubi was being shepherded around. I noticed that the person who was walking him around the Capitol and taking him to and from meetings was Michael Carpenter, who was at the time he was the executive director of the Biden Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. He was Biden's Russia handler and Ukraine handler when Biden was basically the imperial lord of Ukraine after Maidan. And Carpenter, I went up to him and I said, do you know that Parubi founded these neo-Nazi parties, that he is basically denying the role that Ukrainian Nazi collaborators played in all of these anti-Jewish pogroms? Like, what are you doing? And he's like, he is a great figure. He's someone who's standing up for his country. He got really upset with me. And then over the next 2 years, he was attacking me on Twitter saying, that me, Tulsi Gabbard, Noam Chomsky, and Glenn Greenwald are like Russian agents. And he was just always attacking me. This is the figure who is in the Biden administration now guiding this policy. And he is just as tied to the Ukrainian ultranationalists as he ever was. So again, the Biden administration on foreign policy, and all of this is going below the radar, is as extreme as my worst predictions could have been over the last 4 years as Russiagate peaked. And we haven't even gotten into China yet, where we see just a straight up continuum between Trump's, the hybrid war Trump started with China and the Biden administration.
I think Ben is lining up that clip of Max talking to Mike Carpenter. But one thing I wanted to say about Russiagate, your comment about how it set the stage for this. I mean, you have the component of using Russiagate to criminalize any kind of diplomacy with Russia. That was a major aim. Anytime Trump talked about getting along with Russia, that was presented as evidence that he somehow compromised. And then you have many specific Ukraine ties, including the fact that, a key cast member in the fictional narrative of a Trump-Russia plot is this guy, Konstantin Kilimnik, who was a business pal of Paul Manafort. And near the end of the Mueller investigation, when they realized they had absolutely nothing, like this thing was over, all of a sudden they introduced this claim about Kilimnik that he has some vague Russian intelligence ties. And that became this big, huge bombshell thing. And they developed this conspiracy theory that Kilimnik was given sensitive polling data, which he then gave to Russia. And Russia somehow used that polling data to tailor their social media ads about like Buff Bernie and masturbation ads to battleground swing states. That was like the big part of the meta narrative. Now, Mueller never defined what those so-called ties were, and the evidence that he gave for Kilimnik being somehow associated to Russia was ridiculous. And later on, the Senate Intelligence Committee this past summer took it a step further and called him a straight-up Russian spy. And of course, no one had any evidence for it, but the reason they did all this is because he was convenient for a narrative. And they also wanted to particularly stigmatize his efforts around Ukraine, where during the campaign and a bit after Trump won, Kilimnik was involved in some like offhand discussions, not even serious, but like some discussions about a peace agreement for Ukraine, which ultimately resembled very much the Minsk Accords that were reached between all the different parties. And one of the key elements was having autonomy for the Donbass, some form of limited autonomy for this region that is resisting the Ukrainian government right now. And so calling Kilimnik a Russian spy and, mixing him up in this collusion conspiracy theory was also a way to stigmatize that. So whoever is doing this all behind the scenes, they have a very clear agenda. It's to continue, as Max was saying, the Maidan Coup that they started back in 2014 and stigmatize any kind of remote attempts at resolving it through diplomacy.
Yeah, well, I have that clip here. This is Michael Carpenter of the Biden Institute.
This is basically Zelensky's boss. I don't have any sound here.
No sound, yeah.
Which has been a problem.
This sound's not working?
No.
No sound.
All right, well, just
basically a guy who works for Biden got really mad at me, just to sum it up. No,
and then
I mean, I was really polite to him. I was like, sir, did you know that he's founded 2 neo-Nazi parties? One of them is called the Social National Party. Like, he has a book where he appears in a literal brown shirt with a tie and a gun strapped to his waist, and he has like a shaved head, and he's standing in front of a Bandera monument. This is like his memoir. And this is the guy that Biden's Russia handler is welcoming to Capitol Hill. But like, we're the ones in like what is it? It's a brown-blue alliance. So yeah, I wish that the sound would play. I bet there's a lot of other insane clips we could play. I mean, but the point is the really dangerous figures who enacted this coup in 2014 that completely shifted Europe towards this kind of permanent war footing that brought back the atmosphere of the Cold War. These reckless characters who then went out of government through the revolving door to arms industry funded think tanks, funded by Raytheon, which, is benefiting from the Ukraine conflict, because every time we hear a call for offensive weaponry, it's for the Javelin missiles that they're making that are going straight to the Ukrainian military. And now I wish, I don't know. Actually, if you go to my Twitter account, Ben, I retweeted someone who tweeted out a clip of Ukrainian soldiers being rushed to the front, and one of them was wearing a Totenkopf patch. That is,
I already have that up. I tweeted about it too. I didn't even see. I mean, I saw it going around a lot. And what's incredible is, I mean, this is a Nazi SS symbol, and here I'll zoom in. You can see the skull there. I mean, this is a Nazi symbol. But what's incredible is that this isn't the first time we've seen this appear among Ukrainian soldiers, this Nazi symbol. Back in 2018, the former Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, posed with a bunch of these soldiers. And as you can see, that one of them next to him is wearing that same Nazi patch, as was pointed out by this amazing website, Defending History, which does a lot of really good original research on these issues of Holocaust revisionism in Eastern Europe, in these NATO member states and European Union member states. And this research never gets any mainstream coverage.
Yeah, I mean, as this conflict intensifies, it will be increasingly hard to discuss the real base of neo-Nazism, where neo-Nazism is finding sponsorship once again by a traditional sponsor in NATO, because of the domestic constituency in the U.S. that was created by Russiagate, where it appeared. I at first I thought, when George Stephanopoulos cornered Biden, or that he cornered Biden, put Biden on the spot, and that Biden was unable to finesse his way out of the trap that was laid for him by Stephanopoulos to not call Putin a killer. Because even if there is a new Cold War, you would think that the U.S. would want to maintain some kind of diplomatic ties. I mean, this led to Russia withdrawing its ambassador in Washington. Russia said that relations with the U.S. are at a new low. But if you actually look at on social media as a gauge, like Blue Anon, what Aaron calls Blue Anon social media, like people who actually think that Maddow is this brave and insightful truth teller, the reaction to the fallout of Russian-U.S. relations that Biden caused with that comment was good. Yes, that's great that he's doing this. This is what we've wanted, because that's the evil regime that installed Donald Trump and is responsible for, everything bad that happens.
Yeah, I saw some prominent Blue Anon member being like, finally, a
Yeah.
president who stands up for Putin. Like, this is what I live for. And this is what liberal America has become. It's completely subsumed by Cold War mania. And so using Trump as a foil for that was so genius by the hawks in Washington and neoliberal elites, because Trump is so despised. So they were able to use him to advance a far right agenda that is threatening, danger for the entire planet. It reminds me of it was destructive in so many ways. We were talking before about the weapon sales to Ukraine. When Trump briefly put those on pause in the incident that ended up getting him impeached, one of the reasons why there started being concern inside the U.S. government was because they started getting calls from the defense industry. A Pentagon official named Laura Cooper testified about this. She said various folks in the Pentagon got calls from industry, and they were starting to get concerned. So that's actually an underrated aspect of that first Trump impeachment, which is that the sort of like the controversy that started internally inside the government was generated by military contractors who were getting concerned that these weapons that they sell to Ukraine were on pause for a brief review. And that's what then liberals were enrolled in defending, not in defending healthcare or fighting Trump's upward transfer of wealth with the tax heist, but defending our ability to send weapons to Ukraine, make money for arms manufacturers, arm neo-Nazis, and threaten war with Russia.
Yeah, it reminds me of the time that the Revolutionary Communist Party of the mysterious Bob Avakian went out and protested the firing of Jeff Sessions as DOJ. And there was some liberal activist, I forget who it was, but the word grifter is often overused, but it fits him. I forget his name right now, but he actually got arrested as well. He's like, I'm putting myself on the line for democracy because Jeff Sessions is being pushed out.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just the RCP, which is easy to make fun of because it's a bizarre cult, but as Aaron often points out, if I'm not mistaken, that was the largest liberal protest during the Trump administration, right? It was a protest in defense of a Klan sympathizer.
Yeah. Bigger protest to save Jeff Sessions' job than to save the Iran nuclear deal. I think even to save Obamacare, certainly bigger than to protest Trump's tax cuts for the wealthy, the biggest upward transfer of wealth in U.S. history. More liberals came out to save Jeff Borgard Sessions' job.
Well, yeah, that's because, they're like move on bots, like move on pushes a button and the bots come out. I tried to go to one of those protests early on because I thought it was, against the Muslim ban, and I was opposed to that. And I went out and, I thought it was going to be a normal protest. And I was seeing all of these, this was like early on, all of these anti-Russian signs that I've never seen before. And all of these, it was like Day of the Dead. And these people were literally had signs that said, when can we go back to brunch? And, I remember, the march went to Trump Hotel, and there were a few metal barricades around Trump Hotel, and a few of us went to remove the barricades just to take the protest to the steps. I mean, no laws were broken or anything. And as I was pulling back a metal barricade so people could just gather on the steps and put this like Blue Anon liberal vigilante ran up to me, and he was like, he jumped in front of me really aggressively, and he said, "This is not who we are."
Well, don't forget, these are the same people who pride themselves on being so open-minded and LGBTQ friendly, and they were all like, Trump's gay with Putin.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I saw so many variations. I have to admit, it's actually international. I was at this hipster cafe in Quito, Ecuador, and which is the kind of liberal imperialist types who support this candidate Yaku Perez, and I saw a variation on this. Yeah, I saw a variation on this same sticker of Trump kissing Putin in Ecuador. I mean, it just shows how insane that narrative was and how international it became.
Yeah, remember Sean Spicer, how he was the national enemy, and everyone forgot about him. He's gone because he's he probably said Trump is an authoritarian or something. And he got a job at Harvard afterwards, that great institution that kicked Cornel West out. But Sean Spicer, when he was the target of liberal wrath, Saturday Night Live did this sketch of him and Trump being evildoers together, and at the end they just started making out. So like the comic punchline was, it turns out they're gay and that's bad. It was I'm like,
well,
what is
well,
this?
and if we're talking about Sean Spicer, we have to talk about his top moment as spokesperson when he said that when the Trump administration was accusing the Syrian government of using chemical weapons, and he said, even Hitler didn't use chemical weapons.
Oh my God.
That was peak Sean Spicer right there.
And that's when liberals cheered. That's when liberals put the
they were like
Putin like fear campaign on pause and applauded as Trump bombed Putin's ally in Syria.
I don't remember an ADL denunciation of that or anything. It was just kind of like we were just in our own little crazy corner yelling about that being kind of offensive. But let me just quickly because I think it's relevant to the domestic constituency that was cultivated to support a war footing with Russia, which is that a lot of the hysteria the imagery around Putin and Trump being gay took the form of Putin actually being the macho top and Trump being the bottom. And I remember there was a mural or a hologram image that went up in the West Village, which showed Putin behind Trump, and Trump was actually a pregnant woman. And so Putin had actually impregnated Trump and totally dominated him. And the empire was being weakened by this closet homosexual president in an area where people really do have skin in the imperial game. I mean, the heart of the Acela corridor. So that was where that homophobia stemmed from.
Well, I have it up right now, and it says #love through hate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Love through hate too. Like it has one of those empty, like boilerplate slogans where like the people put on their Priuses, like fight hate, like stop hate, like that, like hate this, imagine this elusive concept can be stopped, because like liberalism always aims to create problems that can't be solved instead of fighting changing actual material conditions. But the point was, we are being violated and our empire is being weakened by this effeminate closet homosexual president. And so that fed into Biden coming up there, like hepped up on, I don't know what amphetamine, where he would like run. Remember, he would start running up on stage in his early speeches, like scampering up on stage to his acceptance speech. And he would kind of read in a drone-like fashion the script. And I was impressed that he was able to actually just get through the teleprompters. But then out of nowhere, he turned bellicose, and he would say, I will restore international order. I will restore order. He sounded like an angry father. It's like probably what Hunter Biden had to deal with as a young man. And that was him signaling to that Russiagate domestic base that like, I'm not going to let Putin anally violate me as Trump did. And of course you're not allowed, you call that homophobic and everyone would just say you're crazy, but I saw it as such.
By the way, to put that mural in the West Village, what's in the West Village? It's the Stonewall Inn.
Yeah.
The site of,
it was up in Chelsea.
Like, so you're actually, and then to have that so accepted, I don't remember there being opposition to that or people pointing out the homophobia. And on top of that, the irony of putting that in the birthplace, in the city where a movement against homophobia began, where people sacrificed their lives, at the Stonewall Inn uprising. It all flew over everyone's radar.
It's synonymous with the sort of normalization of gay life to the point where, the gay pride parade in Washington, D.C. features float after float of Beltway bandits, like the Halliburton float, the Raytheon float.
Wow.
You have all the openly gay D.C. cops marching. And there's sometimes a small contingent that's like the queer anti-war contingent that rejects all of that. But for the most part, it's like the imperial gay pride parade. It's kind of disturbing.
All right, we're going to take a pause there. This is part of our live stream discussion at the Gray Zone with not just my co-host Max Blumenthal, but also Aaron Maté, our colleague at The Gray Zone. Definitely check out the other parts of this conversation. If you want to support the work we do here at The Gray Zone or at Moderate Rebels, please go to patreon.com/moderaterebels. And as always, thanks for listening.